Next guest joining us now, Wyoming Senator Dr. John Barrasso, and Georgia Senator and CEO, former CEO, David Perdue. I had to give you, I mean, it's tough.
It's tough.
You got a guy who's got all these titles over here. So we already talked about this, senators, and that is just the take. You knew it was coming. But, got the Washington Post and the New York Times here, but you knew it was coming. Let's see. Let's start with the Washington Post. Senate GOP wrestling now with an agenda full of peril, and because of Comey. Now you guys just know, hopefully you guys know, you're both in very perilous position right now. And then New York Times is that you guys, the Senate GOP, you're now edging back, distancing yourself from the president because you need to be reelected at some point, too, and now's the time to start pulling back after the Comey thing. So, I mean, is this...
Well, when I ran, I didn't listen to the media. In 2014, it worked out.
You need to listen to the media, Senator. You're on the media. You're espousing views now in the media. How can you not listen to the media when you are on the media? You live by the sword and die by the sword.
When they say it's time to retrench from this president, I take issue with that because I think it's about time that we break some eggs in Washington and change the direction. I mean, look, we were headed in the wrong direction. Look at consumer confidence. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Consumer confidence is on the rise. CEO confidence is up and talking about capital investment again. Look, the people in the real world know what needs to be done up here. It's the people in the bubble in Washington that are having a tough time with it.
If I read it in the newspaper, Senator, I assume it's true. I mean, do I need to start recalibrating my...
You need to get out to the rest of America.
I do?
I was in Wyoming this weekend, Casper as well as Laramie. I'll tell you a couple things. One is I was with a number of young students who were then taking the oath of office to join the military. We are in capable hands in the future. But the issues of North Korea came up. The issues of a world being a dangerous place came up. But I listened to the people of Wyoming, and what they want us to do are the things that President Trump promised that we would do. Healthcare reform, infrastructure, tax reform. We need to get the distractions out of the way, get the job done.
Well, it's hard. And reading this in the way I can joke around a little bit about it, obviously. But we're counting on a lot of these things. Stock market's counting on a lot of these things. The promises Trump made counts on Obamacare repeal and replacement, counts on tax reform. Nobody needed a week of, hyperventilating and hyperbole. I mean, not everyone listens to the most out there Democrats and the most out there media outlets that sort of, pander in that. But this is you didn't need that last week when you're trying to do the Senate is considering Obamacare, did you?
Well, again, Washington is based on running to the latest distraction, and what we have are some long-term systemic problems: the debt, the military recap. But the president set out four priorities this year. One is he wanted to get at health care. Second was tax, as you said. But regulations are a big item this year, as well as the Supreme Court. And I would say we're making progress on the regulatory front, and we did get Gorsuch confirmed. So there is some progress. We've got some heavy lifting yet to come with taxes and now with this health care thing.
You point out that Washington runs to the latest distraction. Do you wish there weren't so many distractions for them to run to, just to keep more focused on the things that you want to get?
Well, certain people see that, but Joe just said it right. The ultra-right and ultra-left want to be the noisiest, but 80% of the people in America want something done up here.
But let me just ask both of you a question about your own values, because when you see the president or the White House say one thing about why they did something, in this case, the Comey firing, and within 24 hours, you see a very different answer emerge from the president, effectively undermining his own original answer, what does that make you think about whether you can trust what's going on inside the White House and whether you can trust the president?
Well, what I know is that we can't trust the direction we were undertaking. Look this is the weakest recovery we've had in 70 years.
I appreciate that point. I'm asking if the president tells you something, whether you can believe it. I asked both of you this question.
Well, what he's told me so far, I can go to the bank on. And we talked specifically about policy and what we're trying to do. And so far, he's backed everything up.
Yeah, you do worry about the distractions. This is infrastructure week in Washington. We have so many people coming to town. Hearings this Wednesday on the committee I chair with Elaine Chao talking about infrastructure, but yet we're not talking about infrastructure to the level that we need to fix our crumbling roads, bridges, what we need to do with waterways, all of the things that have to be done. And I just want to get away from the distractions and get back to getting the business done, which is what I hear about in Wyoming every weekend. Get the job done.
Andrew, still not answering Andrew's question. I guess his question, he asked you, I like the way you phrased it about you look at your own values and I hope you come up with the right answer here, because, after what happened last week, if you investigate your own. But I guess what the real question is the dissembling, is the spin, is the way things are being conducted materially worse than the average administration? That's what we're told, that the lying and the untruths and the spin and the alternate facts, however you want to say it, that this is unprecedented in this first 120 days or whatever it is, and that we always got the straight scoop from the Obama administration. That's the part that irritates me. It's like, seriously, suddenly this. You're understanding how Washington works. I mean, is it materially worse? You were you were a senator during the last.
I think consistency is important. You want to know exactly what somebody's saying. You want to take that word to the bank, and you want to avoid the distraction.
Well, I'll tell you, the rest of us out here in the country look pretty cynically at whatever we hear from Congress, from the executive branch, I don't know if it's materially worse, and it's not a good thing.
You can include the media.
Yeah, right. And I don't know. It's 7%. I don't know if it's materially worse than it was over the past 8 years.
Well, I have a different perspective on it. I've only been up here for 2 years, and the view from the outside is different than the view in Washington.
Well, that's true.
I talk about the lens in Washington. They see this president through the bubble lens that they're used to seeing people in the White House. This guy's not like any other president we've ever had. He's nobody's choir boy, but he wants to get things done. He's a pragmatist, not an ideologue. The people in the real world, I call it the bubble lens that people out there use to look at Washington with, and they're frustrated because of the lack of results up here.
Well, to that point, let's talk a little bit about what you guys think with health care reform in particular. That has passed the House. It's now in your hands in the Senate. What happens next? And, John, I'll start with you since you're a doctor.
Yeah, and I talked to Tom Price about it over the weekend. We're working on our own health care bill because what we have now, the status quo, is not working. Costs have skyrocketed, choices are down, they're crumbling, collapsing networks all around. Even this past week, Aetna pulled out of a number of places. In Wyoming, our rates are some of the highest in the country. We're down to a single choice. We had two. One lost so much money they had to go out of business, and the other lost money even though they're still selling in Wyoming. So we need to do something to help try to rescue these people who are being crushed under this collapsing Obamacare system. Plus, we need to do it in a way that lowers premiums and protects people with pre-existing conditions.
The bill that passed the House would not pass in the Senate. Are you starting from scratch, or are you trying to take that bill and work around it?
We're going to pass our own bill. We're writing our own bill, and then we'll conference it with the House after we get ours passed. We have a number of issues that we're working on, including lowering the premiums, protecting people, as I say, with pre-existing conditions. But the urgency is that companies are pulling out of the Obamacare market. You're seeing the rates that are announced for next year much higher around the country than they are right now. So the status quo is failing. Obamacare has to go, and we need to do something that is patient-focused to help protect these people who are out there that have been promised so much by President Obama and have just failed time and time again.
Senator Perdue, you in this group with Ted Cruz? There's a Politico piece about he's put together a group of senators, and he's now Senator Cruz is not as much as an individualist, but he's trying to gather together consensus and work with other senators to get this done. Are you part of that?
Well, no, I am in one regard. We have a small group that we've met a few times, but what you may be referring to is a group that's been set aside by the leadership to deal with Obamacare.
Right.
And Ted is now in that group, and I think that Ted is really trying.
He's important to get him on board with it.
And he's also working to get to yes. I will say this about.
Right.
He is really hard and working hard now with the other members of the Senate to try to get something that we can pass.
Yeah, which that's the thrust of the Politico piece, is that he's suddenly, a consensus builder and not as much of a sort of a.
Well, let's face it, Senator Cruz is one of the brightest guys we have in the Senate. We want to use that for constructive purposes, and I think he's in there right now trying to do that. I think we're going to find common ground here that will get this set up to solve the problems we have today. Look, it wasn't that everything was perfect prior to 2008 either, guys. And Republicans are just as much at fault at this failure in health care as Democrats. But We have a chance right now, I think, to govern and to put this right. Finally.
Ripping it up and then doing the Senate's own thing, how much would be very similar to what the House did anyway? Wouldn't 70 or 80% be the same deal? And
the issues are the same. The issues are the same. You know, Obamacare expanded dramatically Medicaid. We should have reformed Medicaid. That's a system that, as a doctor, didn't work. I saw that when I was practicing medicine. I thought lots of money was wasted. And if the states, like when I was in the Wyoming legislature, if we had had that money, we just thought we could do a much better job getting better care and better coverage and help more people than dealing in the one-size-fits-all coming out of Washington.
Who's doing your PR? You got some good PR for okay,
we want to get the policy right.
What, Obamacare signed up 11 million people or so?
Mostly on Medicaid, a failing system where about 1 out of 3 doctors won't take them.
The narrative is 24 million people are going to lose Obamacare. You let the left say this, but what they're saying is, if you do the projections for who's going to be added by the year 2030,
right.
If you don't add them to Medicare, 24 million people don't get coverage. So they're conflating 11 million that are covered by Obamacare with the future 24 million getting it. And no one's there to push back on.
Here are the real numbers. There were 48 million people in America who did not have health insurance prior to the ACA. Today, as we sit here, 28 million people do not have coverage today. Of the 20 million that got it during the ACA period, 16 of it got it because of Medicaid
expanding
expansion.
Medicare. Which
do you think it was appropriate for the House to pass the bill without having the CBO score the final blow?
Yeah, I think it's okay because it's got to come to us, and we're probably not going to do anything finally until we see that CBO score. But let me tell you this. I, for one, don't put a lot of weight in that CBO score. I've said this publicly several times. And what I'm trying to do is help the caucus get to and by the way, help the Senate get to a common sense approach to this thing that works for people back home.
Should rape be a pre-existing condition?
It's not. You take a look at the way that's been all fact-checked.
Right.
It is not. And it shouldn't be. And it won't be. I mean, that's kind of the things that are getting thrown out there.
Yeah, you can find them here. Yeah, you'll find them here. You will. So not scored and rape. Those are the two.
Yeah, and
Joe's exactly right. Discussion about whether you really. We're having a nice discussion about whether you're really covering more people or not. Whether 4 million really are losing coverage, and we shift gears immediately to whether rape's a pre-existing. Is that the most important thing in this bill?
I can't fathom that if you were going to put a bill like this together, that rape wouldn't be.
Oh yeah, okay, all right. It's just in the list of priorities where you're trying to figure out how we do this. That's like, isn't it? Or I don't know. But it is one of the talking
Senator
points.
says it's not.
It is one of the talking points that you'll see. Anyway, Senator, stick around. We do have 2 Republicans. We do need something from the other.
And Peter Orszag's about to be here.
That's right. When we return,
all we're missing is Jonathan Gruber.
Obama OMB Director Peter Orszag will join us after the break. He is now with Lazard and is out with a new global healthcare study this morning. We'll get to that in just a moment. Meantime, check out the futures. They've been a little bit higher through much of the morning. In fact, the Dow has picked up a little bit of steam. It's now up 35 points above fair value. S&P futures up by close to 4 points. The NASDAQ up by 3.5. Stay tuned. You are watching Squawk Box on CNBC.
We can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. The debate continued during the commercial break, and here we are, Lazard, releasing a global healthcare study this morning, surveying over 200 C-suite executives and investors about opportunities and challenges in healthcare. The objective of the survey, to see where these industry leaders see healthcare heading during this time of change. Joining us right now to share these results, Lazard Investment Banking Vice Chair and Co-Head of Healthcare. Peter Orszag is also former OMB Director under President Obama. We want to talk about the results, but then I think we probably want to talk a little bit about what we were talking about during the commercial break, where you got in on this debate.
Sure, but what's important here is, don't forget, there are 10 times as many people with employer-sponsored insurance in the U.S. as covered on the exchange. In this whole debate about coverage, we're losing track of the value and cost agenda, which is more important for most Americans. And frankly, the House legislation does almost nothing on that. Our survey was all about business leaders looking past all this drama to how can they deliver higher value health care, which is exactly where the focus should be.
And what was the answer?
The answer was, surprisingly, the majority of U.S. healthcare executives and investors expect value-based payment to be the dominant form of payment before 2020. That would be a very good thing. And then we need more innovation, and they talked about the forms of that innovation, too, including gene editing, so on and so forth.
Do you think that costs are actually going to come down?
again, this is back to this debate. I don't think they're going to come down. I think they will grow at a slower rate. And by the way, they have been. That's the other untold story. In all of the drama over what's happened over the past decade, we have seen a dramatic deceleration overall, not on the exchanges, which is for a small share of the population, but for example, on Medicare, cost per person on Medicare has decelerated dramatically, way beyond anything you could have expected.
That's great, but we're still talking about healthcare budgets being 17% of GDP
yeah, no, I know.
growing.
I understand.
It's like
and that therein is the fundamental problem. There was a meme on Twitter saying basically, which I agree with, we spend a sixth of the economy on healthcare, and no one is willing to devote a sixth of their income to healthcare, and that's what leads to all of this tension about how we move the deck chairs around.
And if you could fix it, you'd fix it how?
I think the most important thing we can do is change how we pay. If you pay for quantity, you're going to wind up with quantity. If you pay for value, you're going to pay for value. That's the most important thing, and then there are multiple other things that follow, but the single most important thing is to continue down that road. And one of the shortcomings of the current debate over what we're going to do on the exchanges is that whole agenda of how we deliver higher value health care for most Americans is nowhere to be seen.
I feel like we've been having that conversation for 10 years.
Yeah, and
there's been some progress, and the survey underscores that. We just need to kind of double down on it.
the Senate bill is going to try to get premiums down in a significant way for a lot of reasons, because it would help in terms of cost, but it would also be something that voters are thinking about to offset maybe people that lose coverage. If premiums go down, I think the Republicans think that's a winning issue in 2008. So the Senate bill is going to try and get premiums down. How would you do it? Senator, how are they planning? Barrasso, how are they planning on doing it, and how would you do it?
Well, these guys have an opportunity, but it involves things that the House bill didn't do. The House bill did not.
But they're going to write a different bill.
Right, and what you have to remember is most healthcare costs are driven by what the providers are recommending and what they're doing. You need to change their incentives. There's a huge agenda, by the way, which would have some bipartisan support. Not all Democrats, but there are a lot of Democrats that support this movement away from fee-for-service. There's an opportunity there, and at least to date, it hasn't been captured.
Senator Barrasso, as a former doctor, you know very well about how people get paid, how doctors get paid, how hospitals get paid.
I think we ought to be paying for value, paying for the quality of the care that we're getting instead of the volume. I think that's the direction that we need to go in. But the entire cost of health care is undermining our economy. And Warren Buffett said it. You wrote about it at last week's annual meeting. He talked about the fact that it is crippling our competitiveness. And that's the challenge that we have to face. We're spending so much money on health care, and we need to actually lower the cost of care. If the cost of care stays very high, to insure for it is going to continue high.
Sign me up for that
I think
agenda.
Peter has written on this, and I agree that the thing that has not been addressed in the whole healthcare debate in the last decade is the cost of healthcare. And the premiums go up for two reasons. One, they're managing risk, but they also reflect the rising cost of basic health care. And those are the two things that haven't been addressed. I don't think that that's within the scope necessarily of this bill so far, but sooner or later, we've got to get to the health care delivery system and also the rising cost of health care.
Real quick, what is your sense of the timing of when you think you could get something passed into the White House for signature?
Well, there's a lot of pressure on this. I'm hoping within weeks, not months.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit longer than that. We need to get this to the White House because we need to move on to tax reform.
Washington hand. What's your gamble?
Well, they might be able to pass something, but I don't think it's going to have the full CBO score. And I guess I'd be in the mode of be careful what you wish for, because you can get something done fast and wind up with a disaster substantively on your hands, which is then not good for your politics.
Okay, Peter Orszag, thank you.
Of course,
good
the Democrats, the House, the Senate,
When
and
we
the
come back,
presidency.
we'll talk about that huge global cyber attack with Admiral James Stavridis. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Let's talk more about the global cyber attack that has affected at least 200,000 computers in over 150 countries. The attackers are demanding a ransom be paid to unlock those computers that are held hostage. Some security experts are predicting a second wave of attacks to potentially take place this morning as employees arrive at work and turn on those affected computers. Joining us right now for more on the government's response, plus the latest out of North Korea, is Admiral James Stavridis. He is the dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts University and the former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO. And Admiral, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good to see you, Becky.
So we know how this already played out over the weekend. There are expectations that it continues. Are we done with this, or is this going to have a second leg down?
Mixed messages thus far. Today we're seeing more computers affected in Asia, but as Europe comes online this morning, not so much. So let's hope that this one will burn itself out. And I use that phrase deliberately. We need to kind of think of this almost as a pandemic. It really is a virus. And the key here is its global nature. We've never seen something sweep across the planet at this speed. It's very worrisome.
Does this tell you that there are other potential pandemics that could be released? Like this is the opening of Pandora's box to some extent?
It absolutely is. And, you know, I'm hesitant to say, hey, we're seeing a nascent cyber Pearl Harbor, but we ought to wake up to the real potential of a devastating attack in this way. And this one is kind of part of the release of some National Security Agency tools, but these can be manipulated very easily to create that second wave.
You know, we always think of nation states as being the real bad actors if we get attacked by the Chinese or the Russians or somebody else, but they've all been attacked this time around. Who is this and who are we fighting?
This is cyber criminal activity, Becky, and I don't see this as something that emanated from a nation state. There really is a crime, money, motive. And if you think of cyber threats generally, it's nation states, it's cyber crime, and then it's kind of hacktivism, terrorism. Those are three categories. This is the middle one.
Admiral, when you spoke a few weeks ago in front of the Armed Services Committee, you talked about detection, deterrence, and defense. It's very difficult to detect these things. How in the world are we ever going to get to the point where we can deter this type of activity?
Well, we need to, first of all, Senator, develop a doctrine. We haven't even really defined what constitutes a cyber attack in the nation-state space. So we've got to define that. When is our nation truly under attack? When there's kinetic damage, when there is personal damage. So that's doctrinal. Secondly, we've got to get better at the interagency in working this. Today, we have 3 different agencies in charge of this, 6 different cyber centers across the country. I think there's a role for Congress in trying to at least create a voice, a centralized voice on cyber in the cabinet.
Admiral, are we making ourselves safer or less safe by moving everything to the cloud? And when I say cloud, really only 3 major service providers, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, which control all of it. This attack doesn't work on that. This attack actually works on each computer independently. But ultimately, are we all going to be at the mercy, if you will, of 3 companies that are going to hold all of our information?
Yeah, I think in this regard, Andrew, it's like in real estate, location, location, location. In cyber, it's backup, backup, and backup. So we need to be in the cloud. We also need hard drive backup, and we need some number of computers that are really disconnected from the internet that can be brought on in an emergency. So it's really 3 levels. And you're right to raise the question of these 3 service providers. We need a more distributed defensive mechanism.
It's not just cyber attacks that we're worried about these days, but also traditional missile attacks, particularly with what's been happening with North Korea. And maybe you and Senator Barrasso could both talk a little bit about where we stand right now with North Korea.
Yeah, I always say it's sort of 2 streams of threat. One is the miniaturization and the hardening of nuclear weapons. The other is the ballistic missiles, the ability to deliver them at range. And it's like in Ghostbusters, you don't want those streams to cross. They're going to cross in the next 18 to 24 months. And then I think the United States has a very difficult decision.
It's a much tighter timeline than some people had been anticipating. A year and a half, potentially?
Yeah. And just as I look at the technology and the reports I get, it's accelerating, not de-accelerating.
So, Senator, you are just back from that region of the world. What does that mean? Should we be back to trying to talk and negotiate with this regime again, or is there something else that we need to be doing if we're talking about that tight of a time frame?
Because what we've seen is the North Korean efforts have increased in terms of scale, scope, sophistication. They've moved from liquid to solid fuel, which allows them to be more stealth and more reliable in what they're doing. This missile over the weekend, I mean, 1,200 miles high. The capacity to get to our troops in our facilities in Guam is there. We need to be engaging China. President Trump did that with President Xi, but you're right, I was in China and was in Japan talking about that. So everything's on the table. What we want is a peaceful solution to this. We want to make sure that that whole Korean peninsula does not have nuclear weapons. And the best way to do that is have China engaged as our partner. Often we don't have overlapping interests with China, but we do on this. They don't want North Korea at war with the rest of the world. It brings it very close to them. But 90% of the resources that go into North Korea come through China. Okay. They're now going to stop, they say, the purchase of coal from North Korea, because that forwards a lot of money into North Korea. You know, we can put all the sanctions that we want on North Korea. There have been a lot of ways and loopholes around it. China is going to be the active participant.
Senators Barrasso and Perdue are going to be staying with us. Admiral Servitas, want to thank you very much for joining us today.
What a pleasure. Great to see everybody. Thanks.
Yes, when we return, we will have more from our senators as we head to break. Here, take a look at some of the big earnings coming out this week. The list includes Home Depot, TJX, Target, Walmart, Cisco, Alibaba, Salesforce.com, and Campbell Soup.
Welcome back to Squawk Box, everybody. Take a look at the futures this morning. We have seen green arrows. Dow futures up by 37, S&P up by 4, the NASDAQ up by 3.
We want to get back to our guest host this hour, Wyoming Senator Dr. John Barrasso is here. Georgia Senator David Perdue is also here. We've talked a lot about health care. Want to get to taxes, or at least understand whether you think we will be getting to taxes in this calendar year, because that seems to be the other major concern that investors have right now. What do you think?
I sure hope so, Andrew. I tell you, we set this year out. The president laid out his priorities of health care, regulatory reform, and tax. And got Gorsuch confirmed to the Supreme Court. Look, it takes a year and a half before these changes take effect in the economy. So we've got to get this going in order to support the expectation of consumers and investors around the country today. So we've got to get this done this year.
Yeah.
You think it's realistic, too?
Yeah, I think it is realistic, and we need to do it. We want a strong and healthy economy. And you say, why do you need to do tax reform? Well, it's to help the economy. It's to get more people working here at home. It's to bring jobs back from overseas. I think we need to do repatriation, get to a territorial tax system. There's a lot of money that's sitting overseas. There's a lot of things we need to do. We want to lower the rates, make it simpler. So our goals are there. We know what we need to get done, but I believe we have to get to health care first, because there are two things we can do without Democrat support. One is health care and one is tax reform. I'd like to do these in a bipartisan way, but they've said, no, we're not that interested in being involved with it. But using reconciliation, a process in Congress, we can do this with a united Republican Senate.
I wanted to ask both a question about employment, because one of the things that the tax policy should hope to do is try to trigger some more employment in the United States. But one of the industries that has been killed is an industry you know very well, which is the retail business and the retail industry. And sometimes you see, now people look at the numbers and they say more people have lost their job in retail than in coal jobs.
You know, I heard a number the other day.
Do you think that you can actually get these retail jobs back, or do you think that there's something very different that needs to happen?
Well, as consumption grows, retail jobs come back. There's no question about that. Manufacturing is another issue, and there is the adaptation to technology and innovation. But what's going on in America right now, and what drove this last presidential race, in my opinion, and what affected my race in 2014, is that the number of disenfranchised folks in the workforce. We have about 145 million people in the workforce. There's some, I would estimate over 20% are disenfranchised right now, unemployed, underemployed, and don't minimize that number. And then the people who have just given up and dropped out of the workforce. It's a tragic situation, and there's a conundrum right now that at the same time we have that number of people that are disenfranchised outside the workforce, we have employers who can't find people to work. So this is something we've got to solve.
But in the same way that some people, including myself, by the way, think that manufacturing in America to some degree may be anachronistic, given the advances we're having in technology, what is happening in the retail world? Do you think the same thing is happening there?
Well, you have a move in retail that's moving online, obviously, and we need to create a level playing field there. But what's happening is consumers are finding different ways to consume. Women basically are consuming their aspirational items the way they traditionally have, through named brand outlets, online and in brick and mortar. But they're also growing in online consumption. And the other is, even women of money will consume consumable items at the cheapest rate and at the most convenient. And that's what's happening in retail right now.
It does lead to a shift in terms of where the jobs are. Overall, retail sales, the government's measure of it, is going up. People are still eating out. They're still buying cars. They're doing all kinds of things. But the mall retail worker may have a very different environment. I guess, where do you find more jobs like that? What happens to those people?
Well, that's morphing, right?
Yeah.
When you have online, it moves to distribution, supply chain jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So we are seeing a growth in online because it's more efficient and cost effective. Look, at Dollar General, my real estate cost might have been 3 or 4% of sales. At Walmart and some of these other big box retailers, it's much higher than that. Where you go online, you don't have that cost of real estate. It's a big deal, and they pass that along to their customers. So it's a changing world in terms of consumption. It's affecting the rest of the world as well.
You think tax reform, well, tax reform is part of this, but also is regulatory reform. And the amount of time it takes to get all of the approvals of different permits to get something done, whether it's a construction project, whether it's energy exploration, it is very, very long. It can take 10 years to get the permits. There's a lot of capital out there. David and I meet with people around the country. The capital is ready to be deployed, which gets to the infrastructure part of that, which will in many ways stimulate the economy. Right. Government investment may be a part of it, but regulatory reform is a significant part of it. And I think you need, as tax reform, we do all of these things, you can get back to 3% growth for the country.
Okay. Senators, thank you. You guys are sticking around for a little bit longer.
When we return, we have some stocks to watch ahead of the opening bell on Wall Street. Plus, we will wrap up our special hour conversation with Senators John Barrasso and David Perdue.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. A couple stocks to watch this morning. Cybersecurity stocks getting a boost this morning following news of the malware attacks that have crippled computers around the world. Among them, take a look. Symantec, Palo Alto Networks, and FireEye all up. You can see even FireEye up about 6%. Symantec up over 3%. Also, AIG naming Brian. My pronunciation on his last name is going to be bad. Duperreault? What do you think? Duperreault. As its new chief executive officer, he's going to replace Peter Hancock, who had resigned. Hancock had said in March that he would be stepping down when a successor was found, and now he has. Tesla downgraded to equal weight from overweight at Morgan Stanley, the firm saying the automaker facing an increasing risk of having to compete not only with other automakers, but with tech companies like Apple and Google. And Starbucks was upgraded to buy from hold at Deutsche Bank, which says the coffee chain is showing signs of overcoming labor problems as well as issues related to its mobile ordering system.
Still with us this morning, Wyoming Senator Dr. John Barrasso and Georgia Senator David Perdue. And gentlemen, we have talked about all sorts of issues that are facing you and facing Washington right now. One thing we haven't really gotten back to are the entitlements and how you pay for all of these initiatives that we're interested in doing. Senator Perdue, this is something that's there all the time.
Well, it is. I mean, I think we have two crises in our country today. One is this global security crisis that you guys talked about earlier, but also we have a debt crisis that limits our ability to fund all of these other things we need to do as a country, including our military. But right now, the baseline budget for the United States government means that over the next decade, we'll add $10 trillion to this debt. And most of that is in our mandatory expenses, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the interest on the debt, which is going up every day. So these are the priorities that I want us to deal with in the American Congress. And so far in the last 2 years, we just really haven't done that.
President Trump has said he's not interested
in dealing with the entitlements.
In dealing with the entitlements and is fine in the name of growth in increasing the debt.
Well,
you on board?
We've had this conversation.
I know.
And there are steps to this progress. The first step is job one is getting the economy going again.
Right.
Senator Barrasso?
You're right. You can't cut your way to this. You need to grow your way through it. But I was saying, yesterday was Mother's Day. My mom's 94. The year she was born, life expectancy for a woman in America was 56. So for all the right reasons, we have, through advances in medicine and clean air and water and hygiene, all of these things, have added all these years. We've added all of these years to life expectancy in this country, but we got the math wrong on Social Security and Medicare. When Social Security was placed in, they didn't think people were going to live to 65, and you listen to Lyndon Johnson's old speeches on Medicare, it was for the widows, because all the guys were going to be dead, and it was for the last 3 years of the women's life. So
and yet every time somebody has one of these promises that have been made to them, good luck taking it away.
Yeah, and they say they paid in, and they have, and they paid in a lot, but they usually use up those resources long before they get to the ages that we're seeing now. So we have these two tidal waves coming at us in terms of Social Security and Medicare, in terms of just costs to the economy, that we need to continue to look at and resolve over time, because 10,000 baby boomers today are turning 65, as they did yesterday and will tomorrow, and we need to continue the economy growing and more people with jobs and working contributing.
Senators, want to thank you both for taking the time to sit down with us today. We truly appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
This was fun.